And we're back in black, playing Pathfinder Kingmaker, and today we're gonna talk about the Rogue. Now the Rogue, I usually start off speaking in role-playing terms. He's kind of the guy or girl who's like brought up on the streets very streetwise, maybe has a small weapon like a dagger or even crossbow or something. He might be an assassin or might be a thug or something. And this is a character, in my opinion, which could very well be an evil character. He doesn't have to be an evil character, but it's one of the characters which kind of suits, in my opinion, best to be an evil character because of how he's brought up, because of his backstory and all that. He might have led him to become more evil because of the things that he's done in his past. But that might also not be the case. You can roleplay the Rogue in any way. He might have been, become more righteous or something because of how he was brought up. Doesn't matter. Anyways, if we talk about gameplay terms, but usually when I talk about these characters, I evaluate them on the basis on how useful they are in unfair difficulty, and I also evaluate them on two axes. So I usually use the example of the fighter, for instance, as 100% combat prowess, 0% utility. If we take the counter example, that would be the Bard, has 100% utility, 0% combat prowess. Now the Rogue, it's very different in Pathfinder from other games. Usually in other games, if you have like an action RPG or something, usually the Rogue is like the glass cannon. He has very little health, but has a very, very high damage. In this game, not so much the case, I would say. The Rogue has a way to deal damage, to deal some extra damage called sneak attack. We're going to talk about that also. But don't think of that as the main purpose of the Rogue. The Rogue is still mostly utility. I would put them at 40% combat prowess, 60% utility. And much of this is because the only way to even enable the damage, he has two things not really working for him. So first, maybe let's just talk the base stats here. It's a 1d8 hit die. This is right between the sources, which has a d6, and the fighter, which has a d10, which is kind of medium. And also, he has like a medium good progression with base attack bonus. It doesn't gain the full base attack bonus like the fighter or barbarian or a full fighter class. But he gains some. He gains some of it, so it's still a little bit too low, I would say, on unfair difficulty to be able to reliably hit stuff, which is kind of the main problem with the Rogue. And he will also not gain 4 attacks on the higher levels. He will only have 3 attacks compared to the fighter, which will have 4 attacks, of course. And it doesn't start off with a base attack of 1, which means he can't go immediately into weapon focus, which also cripples his early game. So he has a lot of things going against him. But then if we talk about the things that says he has going for him instead, that is that he has sneak attack. But then again, sneak attack you need to enable. So let's talk about sneak attack. The character's attack deals extra damage anytime he would be denied a dexterity bonus to AC or when the character flanks her target. So, there are a couple of ways of enabling sneak attack. The easiest way is to have someone else stand in the front and you go around behind and just stab them in the back. That's kind of the idea behind a sneak attack, right? So, anytime the characters can't see you, you gain a sneak attack and you get bonus damage. So, flanking a target is the easiest way, I would say, to enable this. The other way would be to either use something to make them not able to see, like blind, for instance, or making you invisible, like invisibility or greater invisibility. But keep in mind that if you only use invisibility, it will break immediately when you use any attack. You need to use greater invisibility, which is quite a high level spell, to be able to be invisible even though you're attacking, to always be able to sneak attack. And there are a couple of spells which can also help you with sneak attacks in other ways. But sneak attack still, even though the progression initially looks very strong, wow, we're getting 1d6 every other level, but if you compare to other classes, it's not that high, really. And it's also conditional. If you compare to the kineticists, which I talked about earlier, the kineticists, well, they start off with the same progression, 1d6 per level, but then it increases because they can do composite blasts, so they have 2d6, so essentially they have 1d6 per level. Much like the usual sorcerer spells and wizard spells, which have usually their spell damage is 1d6 per character level, and then it increases to 1d10 for some high level spells and stuff like that. But the Rogue, he's not really up there. Not really up there with his sneak attacks. Though I will say in sneak attacks defense, you can actually deal 1 sneak attack per round, so you might deal more single target damage to someone than what a sorceress or a mage would deal. But then again, they would deal more damage and yada yada yada. So in summary, don't think of Rogue as a damage healing class. That's not what they're strongest at. if you want to pick up a damage dealing class, I would recommend doing something else, like a wizard or a fighter or a kineticist that we talked about. Those classes are better at dealing just raw damage. It's much easier to enable. It's not such a hassle to enable. There are other ways, of course. You can use sneak attack. Sneak attack is not limited to stabbing in the back. You can be invisible and shoot with a ranged weapon. You can use a spell which has a ranged touch attack. For instance, there's a lot of spells which are rays, and every ray will then gain the sneak attack bonus. So that's a very good way of multiplying your sneak attack bonus. Because, for instance, we have Scorching Ray, and the Scorching Ray gains, I think, 1 ray per 4 levels. So you can have like 5 rays, and every ray will have a sneak attack. And that way you can maximize the number of sneak attacks they can do. We're gonna talk about that when we talk about the Eldritch Scoundrel also. But first we're gonna talk about the other benefits of the Rogue. One of the biggest benefits, of course, is the skill points. They gain the most skill points of all classes, but they also gain a lot of nice passives, and one of them is that on the first level they pick up Weapon Finesse. With a light weapon, elven, curved blade, estoc, or rapier, for a creature of your size, you may use your dexterity bonus instead of your strength modifier on an attack roll. And this is perfect, because as I said, this guy wants to use skills. So we want to be able to actually put some points into intelligence, which means we can't put both into strength, dexterity, constitution, and all these things, and also have enough to put points into intelligence. It doesn't work out, we won't have enough points. But since we have Weapon Finesse, and since this also improves on level 3 with the Finesse training, where you can choose one weapon type, and once the choice is made, it can't be changed. Whenever she makes a melee attack with a selected weapon, she adds her dexterity bonus to the damage roll. So this means that you don't need strength on this character anymore. At level 3, you don't need strength. It doesn't do anything. I mean, carrying capacity, all that normal stuff. But except for that, you don't need strength. So you can focus completely on dexterity, and this takes a big burden off, you know, because you don't need to put points into strength. You can put that into intelligence, and you can become a better skill monkey, which is very good. They also gain trap finding. At least the normal rogue gains trap finding. Adds 1/2 her level on perception checks, and this is kind of nice because the rogue is very good with dexterity things. He's kind of the trap disarmer in many ways, because he usually has a very high dexterity, which adds to that skill and stuff like that. So we're gonna have a look at that later on when we go. I'm not gonna go, as I said multiple times, these are not complete build guides. There's going to be stuff like that on this channel also, but this is more an overview. But I'm going to go through level 1 and what selections I would make there. We also get Uncanny Dodge at level 4, and it improves improved Uncanny Dodge, which makes you almost impossible to sneak attack. I think this is the exact same as the Barbarian, and just a nice added benefit. And what more do we get? We have Finesse training. Then we get Danger Sense. I think this is also exactly the same as Barbarian. You get +1 bonus on reflex saving throws against traps. This, as I've stated in the Barbarian video, it's like a non-bonus. You don't want to be a Barbarian. Maybe you could use your Barbarian as a Minesweeper because he has a lot of HP, but you definitely don't want your Rogue. He has low HP, and also most high-level traps don't cost fireballs. They cost something that take your character over, like permanently charmed, stuff like that. You don't want to kneel that on negative levels. Like, no, you don't want to have that happen. You don't want to Minesweep with your Rogue. Your Rogue should be able to actually handle the traps, to actually disarm them. That's what that's what they're there for, not to walk into the traps and die in some horrible fashion. There's better use for your rogues. They also get evasion, which is kind of interesting that they both gain evasion and uncanny dodge. And evasion makes it so that whenever they make a reflex saving throw against an attack that normally deals half damage, so for instance like a fireball, he instead takes no damage. So if you save against a fireball, you take no damage. This is very good. Very good thing to have there at level 2. So this thing, as you can see here, it gains a very good ability on level 2, it gains a very good ability on level 3. So this makes it so that Rogue is actually a very good class to dip into. If you want to do something like, for instance, maybe you want to do a monk or a paladin, and you want to have this very unique ability, this finesse training, because you don't want to spend too much into the strength, because then you can't have enough dex and stuff like that. Then picking up 3 levels of rogue can be quite strong, and then going into monk and maybe going into paladin and stuff like that. Classes which have higher base attack bonus. You lose out a little bit, admittedly. You lose out 2 base attack bonus or something, or maybe 1. But that could also be a very strong class. You can't then really benefit much from sneak attacking, but sometimes it's good enough just to pick up these early things such as evasion and finesse training. It can be worthwhile to have that on your character, so that lends him well to multiclassing. Now, let's see, there's one more. Yeah, he's against rogue talents. that's just regular talents, but much like the fighter, against things which has to do with fighting, and you limit the talent tree to only the fighting skills. The rogue limit them to only the rogue skills, and you can select from that at regular intervals. So let's talk about the subclasses here, because there are a couple of interesting subclasses. First, the Eldritch Scoundrel. Now, the Eldritch Scoundrel is kind of similar like to the Magus. We haven't talked about the Magus yet, but the Magus is like a slow progressing wizard or slow progressing sorceress. So you gain cantrips on level 0. I don't think cantrips are especially useful, except for maybe days. But later on, you gain, or at first level you also gain spells, and you get a very, very slow progression of spells, but you still gain spells. And this is a very good class if you not super focused in sneak attack. I see you get less sneak attack with this class, but you kind of want to have some way of enable you of getting ray spells. So we'll look at another way of getting a ray spell, but because if you use a ray spell, as we said before, it multiplies with your sneak attack die, and you can deal quite a lot of damage with that ray spell. So this is kind of a way of being able to deal damage with spells instead, and that might be something that you want to do, depending on your build. If you compare to the rogue, the normal rogue, you don't lose that much. As you can see, you lose the dodging skills here, but since you're a spellcaster, you're probably gonna stand far away anyways. You still gain finesse training, interestingly enough, but I don't think that this class, if you go with the Eldritch Scoundrel, I think you're mostly gonna be casting spells, and I think that you mostly want to go with ray spells and ranged touch attack spells, because these are the spells that you that can enable your sneak attack and can kind of synergize with your character. But if you compare the Eldritch Scoundrel to a sorceress or a wizard, damage output will be lower. The only benefit of going Eldritch Scoundrel over a wizard and sorceress, in my opinion, by the way, if you don't feel offended if I smack talk your favorite class here, is that the Eldritch Scoundrel has more utility. So keep that in mind. Don't go Eldritch Scoundrel thinking I can be both a wizard. I can be both a wizard and a fighter or something. No. You're neither a wizard nor a fighter. You're not on that level with the Eldritch Scoundrel. But it's more kind of a utility, and you want to fight in a different way, and you want to do ranged magic instead of... Which is kind of nice, because on the higher difficulties, if you're close to something, you're probably gonna die. So that's quite a nice thing. Then we have the Knife Master. Now, the Knife Master trades his perception check for a very nice ability called Sneak Stab. This makes it so that when he makes a sneak attack with a dagger, a kukri, a punching dagger, star knife, or sai, he uses a d8 instead of a d6 for his sneak attack. So this is kind of the damage class, or the damage subclass of the rogue. And he's able to dish out a decent amount of damage. Not insane amount of damage, but if you want to have a character which you support with buffs, and you keep them alive, maybe you have someone who can blind your enemies, or you can make other things invisible. You can buff this guy up so has a good attack bonus, maybe cast greater heroism on him, maybe displacement, give him everything that he can actually survive in combat. Then with his 3 attacks and all these sneak attack bonuses and them being d8, you can deal a decent amount of damage. But as I said, the rogue is very reliant on his party. He needs the buff to be able to hit something. He needs something to tank to be able to sneak attack. So it's very dependent on your party. But if you have the correct party, the Knife Master can be almost a straight upgrade to the rogue, at least in the damage department. And then we go to the Thug. The Thug is weird. You don't lose much by going thug, but you also don't gain much, really. So the selling point with the thug is that it's scary or something. Whenever you successfully use a persuasion to demoralize a creature, the duration of the shaking condition is increased by 1. So how do we demoralize? Well, the most probable way is through talents. There are a couple of talents which causes your opponents to get demoralized. And then you can increase this duration. But keep in mind that on the higher difficulties, and especially on the later the game goes, it's very likely that we're gonna get affected by these kind of things. So it's kind of some early game tricks, and mostly for lower difficulties, I would say. At the 3rd level, whenever a thug deals sneak attack damage, you can choose to forego 1d6 points of sneak attack damage to make target sickened for a number of rounds equal to half a rogue level. So this is quite nice. You're just trading 1d6 points of damage for sickening, which is probably gonna be better than just 1d6 points of damage, which is essentially nothing. So that's quite nice. The nice thing about the thug, in my opinion, compared to the selling point for the thug in my book is that he doesn't lose much. The most notable things that he loses is the perception bonus that the regular rogue gains here, trap finding. Other than that, he's kind of the same as the rogue, so there's nothing wrong really going the thugger. And I would say with all the subclasses, I think all the subclasses are balanced, and that's much because the rogue is not so much about damage, it's mostly about their utility. And if you really want to build a rogue that goes for damage, I would highly recommend that you go with Knife Master. So we're gonna try to build we're gonna see how we can build a rogue in a good way. So what I would recommend if you're starting off with the game is, since you're gonna go dexterity in the early game, you won't be able to hit stuff and you won't be able to damage them because you won't have a good attack or a damage roll will be very, very low. So instead what I would suggest you start off with is a ranged weapon and use that until you get to level 3, and then when you get to level 3 and specialize in a weapon, you use that weapon then for the entire game. Or not that exact weapon, you can change the weapon but you use the same weapon type. And also what I would recommend is, if you're going for a class, you can go for any class. There's nothing that's wrong, especially if you're doing like a skill monkey build. You can't go wrong with classes. But what I would recommend is the Hellspawn, because the Hellspawn, the bonuses don't matter too much on this guy. He has Constitution and Wisdom, but they start off with the Scorching Ray spell, and as I said, the Scorching Ray spell, you can use your sneak attack die to all the rays. So if you can use Scorching Ray on level 1, Scorching Ray is usually something you get when you get level 2 spells. That's quite good, starting off with that on level 1. So Hellspawn is what I would recommend if you go with a Tiefling. So let's have a look at these stats then. You don't need strength, as I said earlier. You definitely want as much constitution as you can have. You don't need charisma at all on this build. And then constitution I would like to have here, but it's probably something like this. This is pretty good. You want some constitution even though you're a rogue, and even if you're gonna do a rogue which has a ranged weapon, because you can do that also. You want some constitution because you don't want to get one shot by an unlocker roll from like a fireball or something. Some ranged attack that hits you. Maybe there's an archer or something. You want a little bit of constitution if you can. You can master it. If you want to make a complete skill monkey, then just skip constitution also and just, build up your intelligence like this. This could also work. You don't lose that very much HP, but you lose out like 2 or something here. So it will be quite fragile, but maybe you can, stay out of harm's way or something. But if you're going with a melee rogue, then no. You need a couple of points in constitution. Something like this could be fine. So here we see the thing where, since we have put so many points into dexterity, we have a very good modifier here to these rolls, and these rolls are kind of like the typical things that what you would expect from a rogue, like to be very stealthy, to be very trickery, to be able to disarm traps, to have some mobility, to pass some mobility checks, and they also gain a natural bonus of perception, and perception is very important because that makes you able to find some of the best items in the game if you're able to pass perception checks. If this is your main character, I would also recommend that you go persuasion, and if you don't have a cleric in your party, then someone who can use magic device is very, very good. So pick those up. Now come to the skills, and what I would recommend is that you go for, since you're a skill monkey, keep in mind that you don't need to go too much into combat skills. Instead, except for maybe weapon focus, except for that, I would just go skill focus, trickery, and just be focused on being able to disarm those traps in the game. So skill focus, trickery, and then just every level pick up more skill focus, much like the bard is how I would level a rogue. For alignment, you can do anything, but keep in mind if you want to multi-class this guy, it might be very advantageous to go into lawful good, because then you can pick up both paladin and you can pick up monk. So that's pretty much my guide to the rogue. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.